Hello. Good afternoon. If all the panelists for this panel would like to turn on their microphone and their camera. Hey, Karen. Hey, Jay.
Hi, Nick.
Hello. How's it going, Nick?
Hi, Na. Great, thank you.
Hi, Na.
Hi, Karen. Hi, everyone.
Hi. So, good afternoon to everyone. I hope you guys got a break and were able to get some food and maybe read some of your work email. Welcome to the Change Innovative Talent Pipelines panel. I'm Nick West, and I'm the Summit Programming Coalition co-leader. I've really been looking forward to this panel. I cannot wait to hear what they have to say. Just a quick summary of what will be happening in the panel today. There will be a 40-minute panel. Then I will come back and talk about the salon session really briefly. We'll go into the salon session for 10 minutes and then we'll have a 15-minute recap. We are missing one panelist right now. So we might have you guys, just because we're not going to have a ton of time, so we might have you guys launch into your panel and then we'll have Anna join as soon as we're able to kind of troubleshoot her. So without any further delays, I'm going to hand this off to our amazing moderator, Karen.
Well, thanks, Nick. And there's Anna. I knew she'd be right there. Right, perfect timing. It's my pleasure to be moderating this session. I'm Karen Hoffman. I'm the provost at Art Center College of Design, and it's a privilege being a partner with the Brick Foundation. A year ago, we were all together in Pasadena in our auditorium. This year, it's a little different, but nonetheless, this is such an important conversation to be having. And so I'm very excited to be having a focused conversation around innovative talent pipelines. And for our audience, thank you so much for joining us. And thanks to our panelists for engaging in this conversation. This is really about creating new access points to engage and attract emerging diverse talent to entertainment and technology industries. A very huge topic. And it's been great listening to the other panelists today. There's a lot of, I think, ongoing themes that we're hearing about. So I'd like to just jump right in. And this is an amazing group of 4 incredibly talented individuals who are multifaceted in their careers. And so I think what I'll do is I'll ask each one of you to introduce yourself. And really the first question attached to your introduction is really, what are these current barriers? What is this? Where are we now? What are these barriers that we have as far as emerging talent getting into our industries and entering our creative fields? So I'm going to just jump in with Na Nguyen. Thank you for being a part of this.
Thanks, Karen, and nice to be here with everyone, and thanks to everybody who's watching. Just a quick background on myself. I mean, I started off in entertainment. I actually wasn't in entertainment at all. I was a pre-med major in school, and then I fell into entertainment because I had a good mentorship, a good internship, and that has been something that I've circled back to in my own work. And so I spent the first 20 years of my career as a publicist, and then the next several years as an independent producer. And I've been at Time's Up overseeing the entertainment division for the last year and a half. And for me, I think part of the barriers that I see, sometimes it's still an old boys club. I think secondly, though, there are a lot of people who do want to be inclusive, but I think we tend to sometimes just hire the people that we know because it's the easiest and they're the closest to us. And it takes time and effort to find new people. I think people want to, but it's the time factor. And then obviously what we're talking about today is a barrier to entry is also, the pipeline and the pathway to leadership. And I think, even putting a finer point on that, what we're experiencing now, one of our big initiatives at Time's Up is the caregiving crisis. That particularly is the barrier for entry and even just a continuation of work for women. So those are just some of the touch points that we have in our work. And I'd love to, pass it on to my fellow panelists to bring up their thoughts as well.
No, thank you. I definitely am anxious to talk more about the internship experience as well during our time here, and women in particular advancing their careers. Tatiana Lee, I'd like to toss it over to you.
Yes, so I'm Tatiana Lee. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much, Karen, and our panelists. Just a little background about me. I am an actor, a model, an activist for Hollywood entertainment for people with disabilities. And I started this work as a person with a physical disability, wanting to break into the industry as an actor and a model. And I realized significant barriers for me as a wheelchair user. I would go to networking events and I literally could not get into the room. And so I started finding a space for activism, which led into the work that I'm doing. I, had the opportunity to meet so many various people that were in the industry that wanted to support my efforts. And that was really important. But getting into now the position that I'm in right now, I work for a nonprofit organization called Respectability, and we have a Hollywood inclusion department where we have a really great lab program. It's for entertainment professionals with disabilities. And I think some of the barriers that people don't exist is that for the same thing that Nam mentioned, it's like, most of the time they say they don't know any people with disabilities because people with disabilities aren't in your space. And there are physical barriers to entry for people with disabilities, accessibility issues and things like that. So I think when including people with disabilities, it has to be very intentional. And a lot of people don't necessarily know what they don't know. And that's where someone like myself comes in that can kind of educate on how easy the process is to include people with disabilities. So those are some of the barriers that exist. And then as of right now, there's not many people with disabilities in rooms.
Yeah, thank you, Tatiana. And again, we'll talk more about some of those barriers in a little bit. Jay Richardson, thank you for being here. Please let our audience know about yourself and what you're up to.
Hey, how you guys doing? First, I'm Jay Richardson, and I want to thank you guys for, I think it's cool that I even get to be considered for something like this. I always seem like a fish out of water in most rooms just because I do have a diverse background, but I'm here as the athlete. I think more importantly in bringing that perspective. As a professional athlete, I played football for Ohio State. In college, was drafted by the Oakland Raiders. So I did spend some time in North California. I was there for about 5 years. I was in Seattle, played for the Seahawks, played for the Jets briefly, did not like my Jets experience, and finished up with the New Orleans Saints. I was in the NFL for about 7 years and transitioned into broadcast after that. So now I co-host a couple shows here in Columbus, Ohio for ABC6 here locally and do some sports shows and some morning fluff stuff, which is kind of cool. So it's a very different industry than I've been in the past. No one's trying to hit me, and I wear suits and stuff, and that's way different than my former life of my 20s. But I think the perspective I'm looking forward to offering is just want to talk about the talent pipeline and how things happen in the professional sports level, and how some of the entertainment and arts community can maybe benefit from some of the ways things are done in that area. And believe it or not, there are a lot of barriers in different ways for athletes when they leave their sport and are trying to transition into these other spaces. The most immediate is, while most kids spent their 20s, doing internships or getting into a career field and climbing the ladder, I spent mine chasing after quarterbacks. And when you're done, you have a skill set that's not always transferable, and you have to kind of reestablish who you are and re-identify. And I think that's very difficult. And then there's barriers within the sport itself, finding talent in certain areas, the NCAA, which creates barriers that doesn't even realize it does, that are, biased sometimes demographically. So there's a host of things to consider when you look at the sports background, but I'm happy to be here. So thank you guys.
Thank you, Jay. And Anna, I am very excited to have you round out our amazing panelists here. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the barriers you've experienced.
Yeah, hi, my name is Anna Akana. I'm an actor and writer. I think the biggest barrier I've experienced so far is just a lack of belief in marginalized people being able to tell their own stories. I think a recent example of that was Music, which is a feature film by the artist Sia, which is supposed to be about a person, I believe Asperger's or autism, And she was incredibly defensive when people pointed out that she hired an actor who was not disabled. And her defensiveness was her saying, maybe you're just a bad actor. You know, we couldn't find a good actor. And that I found that has been very true for my experience in the industry when wanting to talk about anything that is a personal trait of mine, whether that's being a woman of color or being a queer woman. There's almost this catch-22 where people don't believe you have the experience in the industry to tell your own story, but at the same time are not giving you that experience needed to further your own career. So, you know, I just think there's a real lack of belief and trust there in marginalized people to tell their own stories.
Agreed, Anna. And I think we're going to hear a lot more of that through the conversation today. You know, I think one of the areas that I'm really interested in, and you know, these barriers are real, they're vast. You know, I'm kind of wondering from your experiences, you know, what are new ways that you have perhaps seen creatives engage with the industry where there has been some success, or things that are emerging that might be changing the landscape a bit. And you know what, Anna, I'll start with you again, since I think, you know, you have you've met a lot of challenges when it comes to storytelling and these narratives. What are you seeing as far as a pivot, a change?
I say that I believe that there are some things that are changing for the better, for sure. And I think we talked about on a prep call Minari, and I was a child of the South and the only Asian kid, and watching Minari was such a bizarre feeling of being seen for the first time in a long time. I couldn't recall ever seeing anything about Asians in the South and the immigrant experience that really spoke to me on that level. But then you also have the frustrating Golden Globes who are trying to categorize it as a foreign movie when it's American filmmakers, American cast, American production company on American soil telling the most American story imaginable. So I do think that there are strides that we are trying to make as a whole in the industry by highlighting different stories, but it's still almost treated as an other and not an American story just because, you know, the people in it are speaking a different language. So, you know, 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of vibe.
Yeah. And not, you know, from your perspective and your career experiences, where are you starting to sort of see these perhaps these shifts of new accessibility here?
Well, I mean, I think I've been really encouraged by some of the work. Well, one of the things that drew me to Time's Up in the first place, as I mentioned, I fell into entertainment because of the mentorship that I had nothing to do with the industry. And I was one of the lucky ones. You know, when I started off my career in publicity, there were no other Asians, you know, Asian Americans who were publicists that I could aspire to and say, this is sort of the road map that I could follow. But I was lucky in that marketing publicity does have, it is primarily women. And so I gravitated towards women of color who were also sort of the others in the room, right? And so that was really helpful to me. And then one of the things that drew me to Time's Up was there's a program that they were piloting at the time called Who's in the Room. Called that because it was to help young executives get into the room where decisions are being made. And so I've been really encouraged by that because it was a small pilot program to help young execs in the executive producer track and then the film production producing track. And it was championed by high profile executives in the business. So you're talking about you know, presence of production at Chernin, at Higher Ground, and, you know, people who really deeply cared about mentoring. And so it was a small program where we had 23 mentees, and within the first 9 months, because of the care of the program manager on our staff, in addition to the executives, 91% of the mentees were promoted. And that only happened because, again, of those deep relationships that you have, because when you have a good internship, you have to, a key part of it is having a good mentor. So I'm encouraged by a lot of the people that we had involved in that program. It was a small group of mentees, but the mentors that we had were, you know, we had a steering committee that developed the program, and then we had probably 60 extended mentors who came in and did speaker series for them, engaged with them, did office hours with them, and continue to do that to this day. And so there are people in the business who I think truly care about creating a more equitable and inclusive pathway to leadership.
Thank you for that. And Tatiana, when it comes to this idea of mentorship and finding others and creating a network, are you beginning to sort of see it from your experiences that we're getting somewhere maybe and breaking this mold of creative talent that's diverse and inclusive?
We're getting there. We're getting there. There's still so much work to be done. And, to Anna's point about, having people from that marginalized group tell their own story. And I think a great example would be the film Crip Camp, that's now, up to win so many amazing awards, where the person who told this story and made this documentary was a person with a disability telling the history of people with disabilities. And I think that's something that's really, really great. We need more opportunities like that. So yes, there's innovative things like a Respectability's Lab program for entertainment professionals with disabilities. We've had alum come from there who we've created an accessible, experience for them, fully accessible. And then we introduce them to executives and different people that are doing a lot of the work in the entertainment industry, these quote unquote gatekeepers, and creating more opportunities. And a lot of our lab alum have gone on to work in writers' rooms, have gone on to be in development tracks at various studios and have job opportunities where they wouldn't have otherwise, because a lot of people are so scared or assume that people with disabilities aren't talented enough, or they don't have the know-how to be able to work in writers' rooms or be a development exec. And I think we're doing a lot of the work to prove people wrong. And then I think Crip Camp is a great example of when given the opportunity, something amazing can come out of it.
True, Tatiana. Thank you for that. It's a great example. I've got a friend of mine, Liz Jackson, who I think was part of that group. So Jay, kind of swinging over to you from the sports background, and I can kind of relate to this. I think, as kids, at least here in the U.S., I think there's been sports as a way to create pipelines of opportunity into other sports, from kids to high school to college to pros. Can you talk a little bit about what you think might be some interesting opportunities in these spaces of entertainment and technology that maybe we could think about what we've done in sports, or what your experience in sports could be some potential, new pipelines for emerging talent?
Yeah, so and that's a great question, and it's interesting how I'm just listening to Anna and Tatiana, you guys talk about kind of the parallels between entertainment, cinema, and it's not that different than professional sports in the barriers and the things you see. It's like you might see something like years ago there was the film Gods of Egypt, starring like almost no people of color, and I know everyone was kind of like, that's interesting. And it's no different than when you see an NFL football team and it's 80% African American, and the owner, all of the executives, the GM, and the head coach don't look like the guys on the field, and you wonder where the disconnect is. And there's a lot of reasons that both things are occurring in both different worlds. And I think some things are uncomfortable to address, but I think it all boils down to relationships. Not everything is systematic. But moving to what you were saying, Karen, so in the sports world, and from my experience, and it's been like this probably since 2002, when you talk about how to, create a pipeline, they started way back in 2002 with a ranking system, for high school athletes. You get 1 through 5 stars. 1 star, you're not great. 5 star, you're amazing. Every school in the country wants you. And then based on how you perform throughout your high school career, you'd get this rating attached to you. And then, basically coming out of high school every year are about 300,000 high school football players. Of that 300,000, only 3,000 are going to go to major Division I colleges, and that's based on these ranking systems. And that's an amalgamation of all these different websites that come together to decide where they want to rank certain kids. And it's really competitive and really stressful for the youngsters. And let's say 12,000 or so coming of that 300,000 get into colleges, whether it be walking on or major D1. Of that 12,000, on the way out, there's only going to be 350 kids invited to the NFL Combine, which is an opportunity to display and showcase your talents. And I was invited. It's a brutal process. The reward on the other side could be great, but there's a lot you have to do. You have to, they call it the underwear Olympics, basically. I mean, you're half naked and you're running around, lifting and running and showing everybody everything you can do. And you're kind of on display for all of these teams, GMs, executives in the room with notepads, critiquing everything from your hairline to how fast you run. I mean, it's really intensive. And I don't think Hollywood needs this kind of process, but I think it's important to understand how, you get from A to B in this arena. And I think at the next level, when you're talking about tech and you're talking about, the arts, there's tons of ways to drum up interest, through social media and stuff like that. But there's no real system in place where kids can go, hey, if I join this program or get to be a part of this, not so much fast track, but this will get me on track to being, one day in one of the seats, that you lovely women are in one day, and have an opportunity to kind of follow behind. And there's not tons of mentorship programs. Whereas, in the NFL and in college football, there was always guys who would come back to the university. Like myself, I go back to Ohio State, I mentor some of the young guys, spend time with them at practice, and then they, go on to the NFL, do the same thing, which is why we're looked at as one of the premier universities. And I think there needs to be something like that, where you have these proven people who've created careers in the industry who are now helping the next generation come along. And I can't speak to how competitive it is in those arenas, but I know in professional sports, which sometimes feels like it's as competitive as it gets on earth, you still have people that want to stop and give back and bring others along. I think that's really important.
Thank you, Jade. Let's talk more about the give back, because I think, one of maybe the areas where we could start seeing some bigger shifts may rely upon individuals. And so a question I have for each one of you is really, what are some, individual actions or grassroots ways that we can give back or find a way to reach into the pipeline of kids and young talent, maybe? What might that look like? I think, I'm going to hand this over to you, because I think you had an interesting story about your mentorship.
I mean, look, I think it's a couple things. I think it's just the simple act of reaching out and just committing to yourself and saying, like, I'm going to spend this quarter and I'm going to just pick and mentor this young executive at my company. And then two, I think holding yourself accountable in a way where you have to set up a system where you have a regular connection with them, whether it's like a monthly or a weekly check-in. It's just taking these little steps one at a time. I think people can get overwhelmed sometimes and think, I don't have a year to devote, but every little bit counts, whether it's you have time to devote for a year or 6 months or a month, or even just allowing yourself to do informational meetings with people. One of the things that I loved doing, I was a publicist at Paramount for many years and ran the internship program there. Even though the interns were part of the marketing and publicity team, I would have them do shadowing days in other departments, finance, research, et cetera. And then at the end of their internship, I would reach out to our executives and say, who's willing to do a one-on-one meeting with them, from our president of marketing to X, Y, and Z. So any little bit of time that you can give, whether it's a 20-minute conversation or a 6-month, weekly sit down, I think just committing to something is incredibly helpful. And anybody can do that on an individual basis.
Thank you, Na. Anna, Tatiana, are you guys, I think you're involved in a lot of different things, but Anna, I'll toss it over to you.
On the other side of it, I have been looking for a mentor for like 10 years. And I think, this might also just be living in the patriarchy and being told as a woman, you're being really annoying unless you have like exclamation points at the end of every email. But I have found it very difficult to find women of color who not only have the time to do that, because they're also dealing with the own biases in their industry and sort of the way for everyone else, but also then the emotional labor of having to like take someone through an ever-changing industry when people are facing their own disadvantages. And I think what I would love to see are, studios and bigger agencies actually providing like some monetary incentive for people to be mentors, because that's asking people to take so much time out of an already demanding career. And obviously, we need that kind of mentorship. Like you don't get this, you usually don't get, what am I trying to say? All of my white male friends have mentors and have like all the writers and comedians I came up with in my 20s have all discovered some older white man who is down to like take him under the wings and we'll go out for beers and I'll introduce you at all the meetings. And it's been so hard for me to find like an Asian woman or an indigenous woman or a queer woman who is willing to take that same time because they're also busy fighting the patriarchy and doing their own careers. So I try personally when I meet younger people who are trying to be filmmakers to be like, hey, you can come and shadow me for a set for a day. Oh, I think you would get along with these people. Let me do an email introduction. Trying to do what I can, but as like an actor and a writer who's on the other side of things, I feel like I don't have as much power to kind of bring people into those rooms and opportunities. Tatiana?
And I would say for me, I mean, I have someone that, you know, I consider mentors, but they're fighting the same good fight as I am. I'm like, there's very few Black women with disabilities pursuing a career in the entertainment industry. But there are people that are there. And I think one of the things to think about is, yes, being very intentional. And I like Anna's ideals of, you know, the studios providing opportunities to really engage various communities. But for someone that is really trying to be a mentor to a writer or producer or director, or even an actor with a disability is, yes, come to, you know, our communities and reach out. There's pockets of communities of actors with disabilities, of writers with disabilities. You know, find these communities. We are out there. We all engage and support one another. So really, you know, engage, and, you know, it definitely has to be intentional. That's one thing, you know, really engaging any marginalized community has to be intentional. But because of the lack of access when it comes to, say, if you're deaf and you need an interpreter, or if you're a wheelchair user and something's not accessible or something like that. So the engagement does have to be a little bit more intentional. Not that much more of a struggle than people like to think it is. It's usually typically a conversation, but you also have to be open and willing to having that conversation and acknowledging that the talent is there, which a lot of times there are other barriers of people assuming that people with disabilities don't have the talent even there. So those are other barriers. I think those attitudinal barriers is the one thing that we really have to dismantle. Because one of the things I always say is you can create all the access and have all the interpreters and all the ramps in the world, but if the people that want to engage you don't respect you and don't want you in the room, it's not going to work. So I think you really have to be intentional and really, you know, take out a lot of those unconscious bias that it has when it comes to creating opportunities for people.
Yeah. And I think, you know, this goes beyond, I think, Anna, to your point too, which is it's one thing as individuals trying to make some change, but really we do need to rely upon the systemic organizations that are really the ones that should be helping those that want to make the change. You know, I think you're spot on, which is, you know, especially coming from an educational point of view, you've got to commit to that. You've got to commit to what it takes to mentor and to intern. And, you know, I think maybe I know I certainly benefited from an amazing set of internships that got my career jump-started. However, being on the other side, you know, it could take up 10, 20, 25% of your week to mentor, you know, these emerging designers that are coming in, et cetera. And I think maybe organizations have relied upon that personal individual commitment outside of those hours of work. And maybe that's something that really does need to change. You know, Jay, I think one of the things I also know you have, which is interesting, is you have a foundation. Am I right there that really is helping young athletes and their families, correct?
Yes. And it's not, I don't like to ever focus on just athletes because you never know what your kids' talents are. And I always found, you know, I'm the oldest of three. I grew up, you know, my mother was a single mom for a long time until she got remarried about the middle of my high school career and to a fantastic guy. And we were able to, you know, navigate life, and I was able to be successful and do the things that I wanted to do. And when I thought about the things that I wanted to pass on to the next generation of kids, it wasn't always about sports. A lot of it was like life skill stuff. A lot of it was, you know, knowing how to tie a tie and knowing how to dress for a job interview, and things that a lot of little young boys that grew up looking like me don't have someone in their life to teach them. And that was where we started, at the foundation. And then it's grown into, a full-on, basically it's like a job fair that we put on for high school kids. And our goal is to get these kids employed, find a pipeline and a way to get these kids from where they are now at their parents' house at 16 or 17 years old. Sometimes if they're 18, I always bring in the fire department, our local law enforcement department. I want to get kids involved in law enforcement because I feel like, we have to have more people that look like us policing our communities. So I try to, form a relationship with the local law enforcement here in Columbus and get them. And they have a fantastic presence at our foundation events and always do a great job. But it's stuff like that. The last thing I end up talking to them actually is about, being a professional athlete, because that's, and I hate to say it like this, but it's unrealistic and unfair for me to go to a kid who's 13 years old and say, listen, here's exactly how I did it, how I got to the NFL and how I lasted for 7 years. You need to do this, this, and this, and you're going to get there too. It's 99% of it is, hitting the genetic lottery. It's not realistic always. It's not, that career field is not something that everyone can aspire to be, and it be something that's realistic. And I hate to say it like that, but I think we all understand just it's a different situation. But what we can help kids do is decide what it is they want to be. And I will work tirelessly to find someone that represents that and has done it and that doesn't mind spending a day with them at our event to give back and to speak into them. So we have people from all, walks of life and career fields that come in, doctors, lawyers, law enforcement, people in tech, people that build video games, people that work, for Microsoft, everywhere. I want these kids to have access to things that when I was their age, these are careers that we never even thought of. And I think it's unfair to pigeonhole kids into this, you have two lanes, you're either going to go to the NFL or NBA, and that's it. It's like, no way, that's not even giving them a shot. That the statistics are something like, 0.002% are going to make it into one of those two career fields. Why would we set up all of our, the kids from our demographic to only have a shot at these things when you see other demographics that are having their kids, go to law school, go to med school. And these are things you can actually do regardless of how big and strong or fast you are. And I think that's really, really important. So I'm very passionate about that.
Jay, it's wonderful to hear the work that you're doing. And, to me, it kind of expands even the conversation that we're having right now around, talent pipelines and helping people find their success. Anna, I had a really good conversation with you the other day. And I think one of the things that came up, which I think is really relevant now, after this last year in particular, is mental health. And I think one of the things that I'd like to have this panel discuss a little bit about is how do we not just get this pipeline of emergent talent going, but how do we do it in a way that is more humanized and really considering the mental aspects of people who are trying to enter these industries?
Well, for those who, I'm sure no one here knows this other than Karen, because I told her, but I lost my younger sister to suicide in 2007. So I'm a very passionate mental health advocate, particularly for Asian American women. We're the second highest demographic to commit suicide very often at college age years. And I have found that just the Asian American and Pacific Islander community in general is very taboo around mental health. I was diagnosed clinically depressed, and my parents still don't believe depression is real. They gave me like a bunch of vitamins and were like, here you go. And so I think particularly in this industry, it can be very demoralizing and dehumanizing, and it can feel like you're just up against something you'll never be able to conquer. At the beginning of my career as an actor, the very first job I had was as a driving student, and my scene partner had to ask me if my pussy was slanted and tape my eyes open. And he was supposed to be my driving instructor in this scene. And I remember how loudly everyone was laughing, and I just went home and I cried. And it was the first check I ever made in this industry, and it paid my rent. And for that, I was grateful. But I remember being like, I don't ever want to be humiliated like that ever again for the sake of a paycheck. And if this is the career I want to have control over the way that I'm portrayed. And so I think mental health is health. And I think what we have to help people with is is how to navigate this industry without compromising your own principles and your own morals in a way that's healthy. Because I feel like, you know, everyone here probably at some point has a time in your career where you have to compromise who you are in exchange for your work. And that is a horrible feeling. And I think that starts with all of us learning how to tell stories in a more accurate, honest, and honoring way. And that's the only way I feel like I can do it. And that starts with me speaking up every time I have a role that I feel is like misogynistic or racist or anything like that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate that, because I do think it expands this dialogue. And, you know, there's a lot of work that we're engaged in. There's a lot of work to be done. But one of the things I want to swing to is maybe an optimistic future. It's the designer in me that really likes to think about futures. And so I'll as we start to conclude this panel, I'll ask each of you to share with us, 3 years from now, year 2024, based upon all of, you know, the work we're trying to do to create these innovative talent pipelines. What does it look like in your industries? And what is perhaps a near-term utopian future that actually could be realistic? And actually, Na, if you don't mind, I'm going to toss it over to you, and we'll go around the room.
You know, as much as I've been inspired by a lot of efforts from companies and places that have put in to challenge people to be more inclusive with certain measures, I mean, to be honest, my hope is in 3 years that they don't exist. Like it just is, because it's second nature, that we don't have to have guidelines. We don't have to have these parameters to guide people, because it's just the way that I think it should be, right? So I do hope that people will understand it's the way that the world should be. There's a lot of benefits to it. And it's just, you know, that's my hope, is that we don't have to put these just parameters in place, and that it's just second nature for us to be inclusive of everyone.
Thank you, Na. Jay, what are your thoughts about the future?
Yeah, that's a heavy question when you think about just where we're headed as a culture. When I say a culture, I don't mean specifically sports or entertainment. I just mean like our American culture, where it's headed right now. It reached this fragile point in the last handful of years, and I think there was a lot of things that needed to be addressed in our American culture. And strangely, I thought this past election and pandemic gave us an opportunity to really get a good look at one another and to really decide like which direction we want to go from here moving forward. So, you know, specifically in the sports world, you know, you saw so much where athletes were told to shut up and dribble, or, you know, we don't want to mix sports with our politics. And it seems strange that athletes were allowed to have these political points of views as if they aren't tax-paying citizens like everyone else who's a human being and, you know, see something that they think is wrong and wants to speak on it. I don't think what you do for a living, how much money you make or don't make, should determine you having a voice in what you think is right or wrong. I think we can all agree on that. So when I look at the industries, you know, a couple of years from now, 3-4 years from now, I think I love what Na said. You hope that some of these systems don't have to be in place to you know, advance inclusion. You'd hope that people start to take a more of a realistic approach to where this world's headed and how it's changing, because America looks very different in 2021 than it did in the 1950s. And I think there's a lot of, you know, people that are excited about that, and there's still a big, strong faction that's pushing back against that. I hope that we're all a little bit closer than we were apart, and I love the idea of where we're headed, especially tech-wise. Just being able to have these kind of Zoom conferences and to be able to connect, I think this really does a lot for us and our culture, and seeing each other more often, even though it's not always in person because of, you know, everything going on. But it's a good way to connect and to realize that we're a lot more alike than we're different. And you hope that everyone starts to get a more realistic approach to how we can do this thing together.
Thank you, Jay. Tatiana, what do you see?
I see, first of all, I can slow down my activism a little bit, because then I don't have to be on a whole bunch of panels saying, don't forget about people with disabilities. That would be great. And I hope that we are just a part of just the conversation of just everyone. Like everyone is included in these conversations, coming up with these solutions. And not only that we are valued for our experiences and our lived experience, and it's seen as an asset and an insight that maybe someone else doesn't have, and it's really truly valued in a real way, which then can help with the whole mental health piece a little bit, to not have to people to have to fight just to be seen, and it's like they're already seen and valued. So that is my hope, so that we can continue to do this work to really, really fight for more positive representation.
Thank you, Tatiana. And Anna, we'll wrap it up with you.
Oh man, I mean, well, I hope I can go to the grocery store without being afraid in 3 years, and we can all hug again. But I mean, just on a human level, I really hope the attacks against AAPI elderly stop. There's been like a 19,000% rise in hate crimes against Asians, and it's been really heartbreaking to see the videos of people shoving old Asian Americans into the ground and killing them. That has been horrific. So I really hope that as time increases, that those kinds of senseless hate crimes will stop. As an entertainer, I have this game, well, not this game, but this thing with my friend where we feel like we're in the Matrix, and now every time we drive down Sunset and we see billboards, you like mentally count how many women versus how many men there are, how many white people versus how many people of color, and it's like I can't unsee it. So I really hope we get to a point where it doesn't feel like people of color are just sidekicks and supporting diversity tokens to white narratives, and where someone can just be a person of color and the show doesn't have to be about what race you are or what your sexuality is. You're just a three-dimensional regular human being like everyone else. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, panelists, for this conversation today. I'm super happy that we've gone to where we did in a short amount of time. I hope our audience was able to get a lot out of this conversation. And Nick, thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you guys. That was amazing. I'm taking a lot away from this panel. So for those listening in, we're now going to move on to the salon session, and we'll re-chat the link in the chat box. So you'll be moved from this presentation back into the virtual expo hall, and you'll be seated at a table, hopefully with someone else. But if not, go double click on a table where you see someone else seated. We encourage you to turn on your camera and your mic if you're comfortable. And during this time, we're asking you to discuss and address the salon's session questions as listed in the link that Chelsea just chatted a minute ago. And then we'll join back together and discuss some potential solutions at that time. As I mentioned before, please do participate. People who are participating in the BRIC Summit is one of the main goals. It's the only way that we can move forward and make incremental change. So please do join in. And thank you guys so much for your time and your energy, your experience, and for sharing so honestly with everyone. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you,
everybody.